primary driver profile. Max Justice.
Sonic, wait up!
All points bulletin. Be on the lookout for Shadow, the Black Hedgehog, wanted in connection with the terrorist attacks. Last seen in the vicinity of downtown Westopolis. Orders are, capture him, dead or alive.
Out of my way. Coming through. Stop! Don't move, or we'll shoot! Stupid humans.
Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope everyone's had a good month so far. At the moment, I've just gone through Sonic Colors Ultimate, and it's a game that I'm sort of iffy on. I enjoyed it, but it's something I'm still kind of processing whether I really liked it or not. Which means that I'm heading towards to some of the other later Sonic titles in the series, which also means that I've gone through a whole bunch since. It's a franchise that I've known about for a very long time, for better or worse. The best parts and the worst parts, that is, where it's been a franchise that is just as iconic as Mario, but has also had its massive downhill slopes and some of its big triumphs, like a lot of other franchises. But Sonic, though, is one of those unique franchises where it's developed a cycle of its own, and that cycle usually results in, well, getting excited for something, seeing the footage, seeing that it's, I don't know if it's going to be any good, then when it comes out, that it turns out to be disappointing, and then the cycle sort of continues. They call it the Sonic cycle for a reason, and it's something that I've experienced multiple times throughout the game, but not as intensely as some of the other rabid Sonic fans out there in the world. The reason why I decided to pick up the Sonic games is because I'd heard that they were really good platformers, especially the classics, on top of some of the 3D games in the series, and as a person that grew up with Mario, Sonic has always been one of those series that I was never really that acquainted with other than what I read or heard or seen about it. But towards the end of last year, I just had this random goal to say, you know what, let's make it a goal this year, in the year 2025, to tackle the Sonic games. And I've played like the first Sonic game in the past, you know, on the Miu Mini device, which I would highly recommend if you're looking for a good retro handheld device. If you don't mind the small screen, you have a ton of platforms you can play on it, going all the way up to PS1, although me personally, I don't really like playing PS1 games on a screen this small, but everything else before that is quite enjoyable, to say the least. In saying that, I did take it upon myself to give Sonic Mania a try, which I heard nothing but good things about, and my journey actually started off with Sonic Mania. It was a game that is supposed to be like a celebration of the classic era of Sonic, from the Genesis period, where some people even still consider that to be the best period of Sonic to this very day. And Sonic is one of those very divisive franchises out there that have all of these different camps where people have these opinions talking about which era of Sonic was much better, like whether it's the classic era or the adventure era or the boost era. You know, out of those three camps, you have a lot of outliers and people that will, you know, champion certain titles that aren't seen in the same light as some of the more like goated titles in the series. But that's the same case with like any other series where they all have their own overrated or underrated, overhated games, black sheeps, divisive titles, piles of garbage, masterpieces, goats. Sonic is no exception in that case. You know, it's a game with a vast library of games that will basically keep you busy until the end of time. Not to mention some of the, you know, passionate fans of the Sonic community that have developed their own passion projects, fan games, ROM hacks even. It's just like with Mario or Pokemon, you know, you're never going to run out of Sonic content to play. And some of the Sonic fan games I've played are even better than some of the mainline Sonic games that I've played. Like, that's how good they can actually get. And I've found that to be the case in, you know, Pokemon and Mario, especially in Pokemon. But in saying that though, I wanted to just stick to a mainline sort of progression where I would sort of go through the classic games all the way up to the modern 3D games. And at the moment now, I'm up to Lost World, and I plan on eventually playing Superstars and Shadow X Generations and revisiting Sonic Mania. Speaking of Sonic Mania, I did initially start off with that game, but I eventually decided, you know what, I wanted to rewind the clock and go all the way back to Sonic 2. Sonic 2 and 3 were games that I immensely enjoyed, and And while I had a period of adjusting to the classic style gameplay, on top of the game's sense of momentum and speed, on top of the mechanics and the layouts of the levels, I still had a good time playing them. And as someone that has not always enjoyed platformers in the past, Sonic was a series that just really clicked with me. It clicked with me in a way like how Mario did with the 2D and 3D era of games. And in the past, like I said, with not really being into platformers, there were certain games that were exceptions to that rule, and Mario was one of them. See, I came off from a Mario background growing up with the original Mario Brothers. You know, my mum even showed me the warp zone so I could skip certain levels. You know, Mario Brothers 3, you know, a bit of World. Super Mario 64 was also another huge one for me. And over time, I would revisit the Mario games on and off, including the Mario Kart games. But Sonic was a goal for me that I just spontaneously decided to do, and so far it's been a wild ride. It's been quite a journey so far, and it's a very rich series with a lot of holes, a lot of spikes, but also a lot of speed and a lot of fun, and so many opportunities to always improve and get better at it. And it's a franchise that I'm still just trying to understand myself like even better and sort of appreciate from a grander perspective. But as someone that's getting into a lot of these games for the first time and playing them for the first time, the experience has been, I'd say, for the most part, positive. And while there have been some stinkers along the way, that's something that I knew that was going to happen. For example, I haven't even touched Sonic 06 because when I played Project 06, I just no longer saw the point. In fact, I took it upon myself to just do this method of where I would watch the cutscenes of Sonic 06, but then play the content of Project 06 since it was pretty much identical, but without all of the underlying issues and technical fuck-ups of Sonic 06. I have also looked at a few fan games along the way. Sonic Revet was one example, as well as Sonic Utopia, and I plan on eventually covering a few other Sonic fan games, and not just Sonic fan games, but other fan games too. But anyway, I'm getting way off track, and here is something I wanted to sort of get off my mind, because it's something I've been stuck on the past week, and it's why I haven't really talked about anything else, and it's really just more so about my personal experience with the franchise, and some of the things that I've learned along the way, and what at least the conclusions I've reached thus far that may change over time or may not. So the first thing that I learned in Sonic, and the most important one too, and probably I'd say the most humbling lesson that you'll get in the Sonic playthroughs that you will put yourself through the first time, is the sense of speed. And the sense of speed where you have to basically earn it. So to reiterate that, what I mean by earning your speed is how the sense of speed can be unlocked, but only through the replayability factor of the game, where you constantly go through the levels over and over again, because a lot of the Sonic games by design are made to be replayable. So when I played through a lot of these games the first time around, I was more so just learning the games, but knowing now that a lot of these games are designed to be replayable, you can achieve much better gameplay and you can get a much more satisfying experience by revisiting these games over and over again. So say when you compare your first time playthrough to say a more seasoned Sonic player's playthrough, you will see a far more zen-like experience from the seasoned player's perspective, where that person has analyzed and has frequently practiced those levels over and over again to the point where they can achieve a higher state of play, where that sense of speed can be realized and achieved only through that amount of effort. Whereas in the first time that you play through it, you're going to be making a lot of mistakes. You're not going to know where everything is, the enemy placements, the spikes, the holes, on top of where certain items are, on top of the access to special stages, which is another thing that is going to be a big struggle for a lot of players. But you see, the foundation of Sonic came from an era of gaming where these games were in fact very short, but were designed in such a manner to be very challenging so that people would get their money's worth. So Sonic players from back in the Genesis days would often be stuck on even some of the earlier levels for days on end until they finally mastered them. It would take quite a considerable amount of time to get to the final boss. And again, this is due to the fact that progression was staked on lives. And when you lost a lot of those lives and you got a game over, then you would have to start all over again from scratch. And that's how a lot of games were back in the day. But over time, things would change, and they would start off by having lives, but giving you continues so that you would have a second chance, to then just having no lives or just infinite continues. So there was never really any permanent failure that would, come into play within the later Sonic titles. Like, for instance, in Sonic Colors, say when you die, you just start back at the checkpoint, or, if you're at the beginning of the level, you just start all over there. But there's no real consequence other than the loss of a potential high rank. And even then, the levels themselves are really short and can be replayed over and over again. Whereas with the classic Sonic games, like say 1 to 3, or say in particular like say 1 and 2, you had to really work your way through those levels and really analyze them and see them from a more holistic perspective in order to really appreciate the design of those levels and to ultimately master them. And having that permanent failure being on top of your head for not reaching that level of success, you would have a permanent setback that would take you back to the beginning, and then you would have to really just focus a lot more on. Whereas in modern titles nowadays, because you have like this progression aspect where you can just go back to a previous checkpoint, you don't really have to worry about failure that much anymore. It may be frustrating, but it's only just a setback and nothing more. Whereas classic Sonic, or, just classic gaming in general, where they had a game over, aspect to it, that was a more permanent setback that really pushed you to play at your best. So ultimately, earning your sense of speed is also in relation to earning that higher level of play that you can see in some of the speed runs or in some of the more seasoned playthroughs of people that have played the Sonic games a lot. And in my first playthrough, I knew that I was never going to reach that level, because at the end of the day, it's still a new game to me with each installment. I treat each Sonic title like a new one, and as a result, I go through the levels and I take my time, and I try not to stress too much about the points or the ranks, because I know for a fact that upon revisiting those levels, I can work towards getting more points or getting a higher rank if I want to. But for this playthrough and for this sort of marathon, my goal was to just sort of go through the games once and just sort of think about which ones I liked the most. And in the future, I can always reconsider going back to them, which was the whole idea. I didn't want to be stuck on one game for way too long. And I know that ultimately this would sort of stunt the mastery of the game that I picked along the way, but knowing that the game isn't going anywhere, that's something I can return to after I feel like the marathon is complete, or at least I've played enough Sonic games where I just sort of say, all right, I've played enough, now I'm just going to play whatever games in the series I want, and that's it. So all in all, Sonic is a game with a lot of replayability in mind, and it's a game that makes you work for that progress and makes you work for that speed, and that's something that I've learned along the way. And if I ever want to achieve that in the series, then I'm going to have to put in those hours, and I'm going to have to put in that replayability time. The second other thing that I've learned from playing the Sonic games, and it's something that I've been realizing for a while, and it's not just from Sonic but other older games that I've revisited, is that games don't have to always be more than just a game. Nowadays, we're in a sort of point in time in the industry where we have all this technology, we have all these avenues of gaming to pursue, where we can turn something that is seen as not just a game, but something that transcends a game and could be seen as more of an art form or something even cinematic. Compare, say, the older God of War games that were just made to be fun hack and slash games to the modern God of War games that now have a far more cinematic approach to them, where it's not only just telling the story and showing some of its gameplay, but they really make a lot of detail out of these long-winded cutscenes with a lot of dialogue as if you're watching a movie. And see, a lot of games try to go for the cinematic approach where they really ham in a lot of cutscenes to try and create this gripping narrative just through all the technical, wizardry behind these scenes. But unfortunately, not every game I think really can justify it, especially when the story itself isn't particularly that good. And it can get to a point too where it just starts to overstay its welcome, and before you know it, you're just already tired of the game before you've even started playing it. Some exceptions for me personally are games like aforementioned the God of War titles, Red Dead Redemption 2, some of the Final Fantasy games, and the Metal Gear Solid series. A lot of these games do make up for it by having some really good gameplay, but also interesting narratives where I actually don't mind the cutscenes, because since I'm invested in the story, I can see the cutscenes as a good break where I get to appreciate the game for some of the other things that it does well. A lot of other games though just get to the point of just wasting your time, and a lot of those hours just through the endless cutscenes or the endless hammering down the story on you when you just want to have more of the gameplay rather than just the story can often lead you to just zone out of the game and make you want something simpler. And playing the Sonic games made me sort of realize that I genuinely prefer the more simpler type of games where the story has a place, and if it's interesting, I'll still be into it, but ultimately it's not really why I'm playing it in the first place. Like, the Sonic games all have a story, generally speaking, but it's never really taken over the gameplay aspect of it, so to speak. Well, some exceptions like Sonic 06, but the point is that a lot of the Sonic games have more so the gameplay in mind, which is something that a lot of the classic games also had in mind, or at least the ones that I grew up with, where you had cutscenes and you had a story, but it never really took too much out of the gameplay away from you. And that's something that I've come to prefer over time. Nowadays, when I look at a lot of the modern titles, I even sometimes just get tired looking at their install size. It's getting way out of control here, honestly. Contrast this with, say, some of the older games or even some of the retro stuff, and the space on those games is significantly smaller, and they still provide satisfying and fun experiences that still hold up pretty well. The whole install size situation is honestly getting out of control, and I don't really see it improving. In fact, I see it getting worse. And with Doom the Dark Ages and GTA 6 coming out, I think that their install sizes is going to be just beyond disgusting. I can tell just from the look of the trailer and the gameplay. And now, why would I bring this up all of a sudden? Well, it's because a lot of the Sonic games, on top of a lot of the classic games that I've been playing, just don't absolutely violate my hard drive space as much. In fact, with the combined size of, say, games like God of War Ragnarok or Baldur's Gate 3, I could just go into the Sage Expo website, get a whole bunch of Sonic fan games and original titles from there, and it would still be significantly less in terms of storage compared to, say, the two games if you installed the both of them at once. A lot of these older games are just more pick up and play, straight to the point, and that's something that I grew up with. Like, I myself have grown up with the late stage of the 5th gen era when I was, just a kid, and then the 6th gen, which actually carried me on through a lot of years, even when I had a gaming PC, and even all the way up to 2009 and 2010. The PS2 is my personal favorite console of all time, and the Game Boy Advance is also one of my favorite consoles of all time. And both of those consoles, on top of the DS and 3DS, have brought me a lot of joy in terms of gaming in the single player spectrum. But nowadays, whenever I want to look for that same sense of joy, I either revisit the older games or stuff that I've never played before, or, play with friends, whichever game that they want to play, or whatever indie game is being cooked up. With AAA though, it's a wild card. I'd say more so than ever. And it's very rare to get something that genuinely clicks with me in the AAA space. Whereas with classic games or retro games or indie games, it's guaranteed that I will eventually find something that will click with me. And Sonic is one of those franchises that did. And it's just made me realize how much more I enjoy classic gaming and retro style gaming in general. Come to think of it, it wasn't just Final Fantasy. They also did a big marathon a long time ago, but it was also Castlevania. That is also another series that I also love, and I've played a shit ton of games in that series. More so the classic style Castlevanias and the Metroidvania style ones. I haven't played the 3D ones per se, but I've played the first Castlevania all the way up to Order of Ecclesia, and I've got to say, it's sometimes easy to forget how fun marathons can be, but also it's easy to forget how tiring they can also be. And Sonic is a massive series, but it's one that I've been more than happy to keep going with, because while there have been, again, some stinkers in the series, I'm looking forward to eventually playing games like Frontiers and Shadow X Generations, because I've heard nothing but good things about the latter, so I'm expecting a treat along the way. And yes, I will revisit Sonic Mania as well. That's also in the pipeline. But other than that though, I guess all I can really say for this, the only other thing I can really say for the second point here is that there was a time where I didn't mind long-winded, gigantic, games with 50 plus hours of single player story content, but Nowadays, I find that honestly tiring. Like, if I'm going to be doing that much, then the story better be good. Like, I better be like immersed in it, which is why I generally prefer shorter and smaller games nowadays, especially as someone that's getting older and knows that at some point they, not going to have as much time for, Baldur's Gate 3s or Witcher 3s and all that. Sonic is a series that just, again, gets straight to the point, and I love that. And that's something I found throughout almost every single title, with the exception of Sonic Rush Adventure, which, while I admit I loved, I didn't like the grinding bit, and there was a point where I got so annoyed with the whole grinding process just to finish that 7th race. Yeah, fuck that guy. So yeah, the third point is going to be just straight to the point, and it's going to be the fact that the Sonic series has bops. There are so many bops in the series. And what I mean by bops, I mean by music. This franchise has so many fantastic songs. Some of the songs are now infinitely rotating in my gym playlist now forever and ever. Tracks like Open Your Heart, I Am All of Me, His World, Live and Learn, and that's just a few out of so many other fantastic tracks. Studiopolis is another one that comes to mind, and of course, Sonic's Green Hill Zone, as well as Chemical Plant. Holy shit, that track is amazing. I could go on and on about the number of tracks, but let me tell you, what I've learned as well with the other things I've just mentioned is that whichever game that you look at in the series, there is always going to be at least one track that is just amazing. Really well done, fun to listen to. For example, 3D Blast. On its own, the game is okay. I'd say pretty average, and at times very frustrating due to the camera, but the Saturn version, the music in that one is excellent, especially if you've come off from the Sonic R OST, which is done by Richard Jacques, who also composed the Saturn soundtrack for 3D Blast. And real quick mention of Sonic 3D Blast, for anyone that wants to play this game, I would 110,000% recommend that you play the director's cut version. Because when you play this version of the game, you're never going to touch the Saturn version or any other version of 3D Blast ever again. So many quality of life improvements to the gameplay on top of the progression system, just making it for a much better experience overall, turning a game that was pretty average to something that's actually pretty decent. I'll leave a link for it in the description if anyone is interested in trying out the ROM hack. So look, all in all, Sonic as a franchise has a lot of great music. Some fantastic compositions, a mix of hyper-energetic music that really just gets you to lock in, whether you're doing a stage level or you're going for a speed run or you're just trying to get that S rank, whatever. You also have some quieter tracks in between, maybe for the more emotional, heart-pulling string moments. But for me, it's always about the hyper-intense kind of music that really gets you into that zone, no pun intended. Even with some of the worst Sonic games, or titles like Sonic 06, there are always going to be some positive aspects in it, and music is one of those things that has generally been pretty consistent, at least for me personally, throughout the experience of playing the Sonic games. So all in all, there are always bops. If you go into this franchise, even when you play the worst ones, know that there is always going to be at least a good track in it. The fourth thing that I've learned is also in correlation to the second thing that I've learned, and it's really just the appreciation and the enjoyment of straight to the point gaming, and Sonic is all about that. He is a character that is just very straight to the point, does not like wasting time, just wants to go immediately. And it's reflected from the very first game where, if you have him idle for a couple of seconds, he will then look at the camera and start tapping the floor, just wanting you to hurry up. And he's a character that, he is self-centered, he's kind of just like himself, a bit too much himself, but ultimately, he will always end up doing the right thing, and he will always look out for those in need just because it's the right thing to do. Like, he can look beyond himself at times when it's needed. In the context of this game too, it also plays into the idea of just him wanting to get straight to the point and just sort of get things done and not want to waste too much time on things, And Sonic, from beginning to end, is just sort of like a rush ride. Now, this experience can also be found in a lot of classic games too, but in saying that, and it is admittedly easy to forget this, there were a lot of games from even back then that did have a lot of long-winded cutscenes. This is especially seen in quite a few JRPG games from back in the day where they had lots of cutscenes you couldn't skip, and if you skipped it, that's story that you missed out on, which is missing context that lessens the experience of the game. So the whole AAA aspect of having a lot of long-winded cutscenes is nothing new, but Sonic doesn't really do any of that. Well, some exceptions. But for the most part, you just have the levels, you just go from point A to point B, go, 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 complete the stages, complete the bosses, go. It's all about the gameplay, and that's really sort of just the most appealing aspect of Sonic from a game perspective. There are other things people also relate to within the Sonic franchise, other avenues that people explore, whether it's through, character studies or, the lore or the universe of Sonic, maybe say the music, cosplaying, all sorts of stuff. But if you're just in it for the games, then what you're going to have is a lot of games that don't really waste your time. In fact, they do the opposite. They generally respect your time because it gives you the whole gameplay loop from beginning to end, where you can just play through these levels in quick succession, and each level, say in the classic ones and a lot of later titles, generally take a matter of minutes. They don't really take that long when you think about it. And when you get really, really good at it, you can generally beat some of the levels in under a minute. And when it comes to games that are straight to the point in that sense of, say, getting through levels really quickly and mastering them, Sonic is one of the best games to do it. At least from my experience anyways. As for me though, I've done the opposite, where I've taken my time because I treat every game like a new experience. Even when I've had previous Sonic experience from other games I played prior, but I treat each new game as like, a new lesson to learn, a new world to explore, a new place to navigate. But I know that over time, I can then develop that speed and just get straight to the point with levels if I want to, say, improve and just really lock in and get it done. But again, Sonic being straight to the point also helped me realize that I just appreciated that, the fact that it was just a game. It didn't have to be something cinematic. It didn't have to just be seen as like this masterful display of art. It's just a good form of escape, something that, that can give you a zen state, especially when you've had a bad day and you just want to kind of decompress and unwind your mind a bit. And Sonic can be a good game to do that, and can simultaneously be a frustrating one when you have higher goals, say when you want to go for higher points or ranks. But for me, that was kind of just optional. It wasn't really the priority. I just simply wanted the experience of Sonic, and so far it's been a wonderful experience. And it's just an experience that I'm going to continue to look for in not just Sonic, but also maybe other franchises that hit similar beats and also provide a similar flow state. See, a lot of the Sonic games are actually quite short. Some of them are so short that a speedrunner could potentially beat one of the classic games, or at least say the first one, while a modern game's overall cutscene time is playing. Like, that's how short these games can really be. In fact, someone, I can't remember exactly, was actually playing through Sonic Adventure 2 while the Sonic 06 cutscenes were playing on top of the loading screens, and I think actually they managed to beat the hero story mode. If anyone can confirm this, please say so, because if that's the case, that's fucking, oh my god. Like, do you see how straight to the point these games can really be? Like, where you can just hop into it right away and then just start dashing through and start collecting rings, going from point A to point B. In fact, hell, by the length time of this video, someone could probably beat Sonic Adventure 1 and Sonic Adventure 2 combined. You see what I mean? Like, that's why those are the kind of games I actually like more nowadays, where you get shorter, digestible experiences that are still equally rich and rewarding, just as much as a long spanning game that might also be really good. Like, I can still get a really good experience within a short amount of time, just as much as, say, whenever I play a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, which is also a game I love, but will admit can be a very long game to get through, especially if, you're doing another playthrough of it. But look, all in all, Sonic is straight to the point, and it's something that I appreciate more and more as I get older, and especially as more responsibilities may come later into my life. That's something I'm going to probably want more of, games that I can just quickly pick up and play straight away. The fifth thing that I learned is that despite some of the things that I've said about platformers and saying that I've not been a massive fan, turns out that the whole time not only was it cope, but it was also a straight up lie. The fact is that I've always loved platformers, ever since playing the older Mario games in Super Mario 64. It was just that I happened to have played some platformers that just didn't click with me, and the more I played them, the more it soured my taste on the genre. But whenever I played games like Celeste, or the Sonic games, some of the Mario games, N++, I always get reminded just how fun platforming games can be, how they have this like easy to play but hard to master approach where they're inviting, but the real challenge starts to ramp up as you get more and more comfortable and as you start setting higher goals upon yourself to really get into these games. And, you know, sort of like with shooters or say racing games, there is that enjoyable aspect that you get through the repetition and mastery of the gameplay. And Sonic games have so much of this. Like, there is this near infinite skill ceiling that you can obtain just by playing the game so much. How fast can you really be? How long can you stay up in the air? You know, how quickly can you maintain your boost and how quickly can you get from the level from beginning to end while getting the highest rank, while getting, you know, lots of rings and among other things. Like, when you approach Sonic from a more holistic perspective, the game really opens up to you, like in a way that I have not experienced in my first playthrough. Like, when I played a lot of the Sonic games for the first time, I knew that it was going to be a rough ride because, you know, I'm not going to know what I'm doing. I'm not going to be able to get that sense of speed. You know, I'm not going to know where everything is. So there would be a lot of moments where I just didn't play that well, or I got a lower rank, didn't get many points, died a few times, things like that. And while I did have my frustrations, I knew what I was signing up for. And I always tell myself during a rough playthrough or a rough, you know, stage attempt that, look, the game's the game. First time is always the toughest. And this will also go into point number 6, and that is that the first playthrough is just a giant tutorial. That's right, I said it. In the Sonic games, the first playthrough is just a tutorial. It's only the beginning. And the reason why I say this is because the peak of the gameplay is only realized through the mastery and repetition that you put yourself through within the game itself. So when you play through Sonic 1 a lot, you then attain this higher sense of skill and performance play that can only really be achieved by playing it and studying and analyzing every dynamic that the game has. You're not going to be able to get this at all in the first playthrough, and I know this for a fact because whenever I would play through a lot of the other games, I knew that there was so much that I could have revisited, so much more I could have done in order to improve my gameplay and in order to get better at it. So the whole time I've been playing more so for the experience of Sonic, where I'm just sort of going through my first playthroughs of all of the Sonic games, but I know that upon revisiting them, I know that a whole new dimension of Sonic gameplay will be waiting for me to master it. This is also common in a lot of other games, and it's not just Sonic, but Sonic is a game in a series that has replayability in mind. And one other series that also has this in common is Mario. Yeah, sure, you can play through the Mario games like once, you know, get your progression and then, hey, I enjoyed that, it was a good time, and then move on. But if you really want to get good at the game, then you have to be willing to go through those levels over and over again. It's why people can go through those Kaizo levels, because they've played Mario to the point where they can really hone in on, you know, Mario's inertia and his jumping and his movement and sort of match that with the level's complex, you know, sense of challenge and design intertwined in what you see in the Kaizo runs. And Sonic has similar levels, you know, from the community where they really push and challenge your understanding of Sonic's inertia and verticality and movement. But even in the first time playthrough of a classic game or say the later games, you're still going to have some challenge, you know, where, you know, you're going to struggle with the speed, you're going to struggle with, you know, navigating the levels, you're going to make mistakes frequently, especially in the boost games where if you try to do things your way, you often get punished for doing so. And it's only through the constant repetition of really understanding the level and how it's supposed to be played can you really get to that higher level of play. Same as within the classic games where while you do have a bit more freedom of movement, same as in the adventure games, there is ultimately sort of like a secret source of, you know, mastery that you have to sort of uncover and sort of analyze and study to really get at the best gameplay of Sonic. So with every game I've been through, like I already said, it's really only just been the beginning. The first playthrough when you complete it, yeah, great, excellent. But that's only just the start, you know. The best part really comes afterwards when you can now finally revisit and enjoy these levels because you've seen like the story part of it, you kind of see how it ends, and it's not necessarily that important because ultimately the best parts of the game really come afterwards when you get to realize more of Sonic's gameplay through upskilling your experience by, understanding more of the mechanics, hidden techniques, or, finding the best possible routes, staying as high as possible in the levels to make them somewhat easier than, say, staying down the bottom where it sort of gets harder. The games just do a really good job of, giving you, a manageable experience where you can brute force your way through the levels. You might not necessarily do that well, and you may take too long to get through them, but they are achievable because they're not necessarily complex. The complexity comes from understanding how quick you can actually be and finding ways to achieve that level of quickness throughout the levels. That's where the real difficulty of the games come into play. And I know that upon revisiting them, that is a challenge that is going to be worth pursuing, more specifically for the ones that I've enjoyed the most so far. I can see myself revisiting the adventure titles and the classic Sonics and Sonic Mania, on top of a few others that come to mind, but the ones that I just mentioned are some of my favorites in the series so far, especially Adventure 1 and 2 I had a blast with. In saying that though, each game, even when you finish it, just feels like a beginning. It feels like you've really only just started because you've seen everything the game has to offer, but what you've only really seen is just the first time experience. A tutorial that's played out from beginning to end, and a game that is just waiting for you to seek out, higher challenges, whether it be through speedruns or, getting the most points or getting all of the ranks, getting the special stages, you name it. It's all there waiting for you when you finish it. And it's up to you to find those challenges and to seek them out and to conquer them. But that's only possible if you enjoy the games that much where you're willing to revisit them in the first place. And Sonic games are at their best when you do actually go and revisit them and replay them and really just, play the shit out of them. And the final thing that I've learned from the series, and I guess what the Sonic franchise has always stood for, or at least from what the character stood for, is to be yourself. He's a character that has unapologetically been himself from beginning to end. He may be self-centered, he may be up himself sometimes, but it's never in such a bad way where it's at the expense of other people, and he's generally gone out of his way to help others in need. Because there are times where he can think beyond himself and think about the greater good and see the good in other people. The game has a lot of positive messages behind it that a lot of people can identify with, and some individuals in the Sonic community have really resonated with him in ways that they, just haven't been able to find that resonance with in other games, especially in the autistic community, which quite a few gamers or autistic gamers have had this, this sudden click and chemistry with Sonic that is somewhat unique compared to a lot of other games that I've also seen, because there are so many things that, say, an autistic person can identify with in Sonic. There's quite a few notable things within the Sonic franchise that, say, those particular players have been able to find. And it's not just autistic people, but just other people that really resonate with the franchise and some of the positive messages that it comes behind. But Sonic is a series with a lot of sensory appeal. There's a lot of moments in the game where you can develop this hyperfixation on things, has a very diverse library of music that is not only energetic, but is also enjoyable. A lot of the characters are not only well designed and thought out, but are also easy to read. You can tell each of the characters apart, not just from their designs and their appearance and color, but also just from their attitude due to the facial expressions that they often give in the game. Say if you looked at, say, the trio of characters like Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, you can tell a lot of differences from the three, not just from like their appearance, but just the expressions that they give. Sonic, for example, is the one that's like the hero of the story, He's always looking to do the right thing. Can be self-centered, just wants to get straight to the point, doesn't like wasting time, but ultimately he will help out those in need. Tails is like the character who's smart and intelligent, but will always have your back and is generally the sidekick, that is always there for Sonic. And Knuckles is, a bit of a big-headed kind of guy, but is ultimately a good person that does have a bit of an aggressive attitude that just sort of wants to, attack problems by just simply smashing it rather than trying to think outside the box, like say something like Tails, for instance. There are a lot of other characters in the lineup that all have their own unique personalities and traits that a lot of Sonic fans have been able to relate to, and depending on, say, the color arrangement or the facial expressions, there are tones and attitudes, some players might resonate more with a particular character, like say Shadow more so than say Sonic. And it's not just those two, but it's the whole lineup of characters that this series has that, you know, that generally has a place in its own universe and also will have something that a player might be looking for. This is something that a lot of games can sometimes struggle with, creating characters that are not only well designed but are easy to relate to and understand. Like say if you looked at two human-like characters, how can you tell what they're really like unless you get to know them? With Sonic's characters, you can tell what they're like just from their appearance. Like it's an easy example, like say Sonic and Shadow, they're sort of like the polar opposites of each other. You can tell literally just from their appearance alone, and I think this is something that a lot of autistic gamers really like about the Sonic series, is how they're easy to relate to and they're easy to understand because they have a lot of visual references to go by. And that's something I've also recognized in the Sonic franchise, where the designs are pretty well thought out. They're easy to read, easy to understand, but they're just cool as well in terms of their appearance. At least that's what I've found so far. And it's also made me appreciate the designs of a lot of mascot characters or, you know, cartoon-like characters in general, where it's just simple but, you know, charming designs behind them. Even with Mario, you can also sort of tell the differences between the characters. Like say if you looked at Mario, Luigi, Wario, and Waluigi, you can tell the differences from the four of them just from like their appearance and also their facial expressions. And this is a really important thing to recognize. The face can tell you a lot of things about these characters, and Sonic is no exception to this. And what this all relates to is that all of the characters are just themselves. Like they don't really go out of their way to fundamentally change who they are, so to speak. Even with a character like say Shadow, he does have epiphanies and realizations, and eventually he does come out in a good way too, but he's still really just himself. He's not going to just emulate Sonic's personality just because he comes out of his way to do the right thing when it's needed. Like say in Sonic Adventure 2, when, you know, he finally sides with Sonic to stop, you know, the final boss, he's still him. And even after that story, we still got Shadow the Hedgehog, where he just hates humans. Yes, I know I'm missing some context here. I know he has amnesia and all that, but the point is that the characters generally have the same kind of mannerisms and personalities, whichever game you look at. Now, the writing side of it may vary between who is writing the stories of those games. But if you just look at it from a more holistic perspective, the characters generally stay consistent, you know, in terms of their designs, their appearance, how they are as people, and their personality. And as someone who in the past has struggled to relate with other people or to socialize with other people, let alone understanding people, Sonic does a great job with making characters with an understandable design that people can latch onto and really get invested in from the moment that they appear. And this mentality should encourage you as well to just simply be yourself and who you are, because a lot of these characters are doing the same thing in their own universe, where they are who they are. Even Big the Cat is always going to be fishing no matter what way you write him in. You know, his minigame also still sucks, but again, he's still doing what makes him happy at the end of the day. Sonic is still always going to want to go fast. Tails is always going to be tinkering with some new piece of equipment. Knuckles is always going to get tricked. Amy's always going to be chasing Sonic. Shadow is always going to be edgy. You get the idea, basically. A lot of these characters just have identifiable traits about them that are just noticeable from the get-go. You don't have to like peel so many onions to really get an understanding out of the character. Now, some people do like that sense of complexity, but I like how Sonic does the opposite of that, and that's something that I really appreciate. So all in all, that's all I really have to say about the Sonic franchise thus far. It's something that I've been really thinking about for a while, to just sort of go on a long tangent about and just sort of talk about my experience of the game so far. And so far, the journey is admittedly incomplete. I still haven't got to some of the really, really good stuff from what I've heard so far. But I thought about some of these points I had in my head, and I just thought I'd like say them out loud. And, you know, I couldn't really think of anything else to talk about. And then I realized that I wanted to really talk about the Sonic franchise, and this is why I thought I'd do a video like this, where I just sort of, you know, randomly talk to the sky and just sort of talk to myself as about, you know, I'm talking to you guys about, you know, the experience of playing the Sonic games. And so far, as a first time player playing a lot of these games, I've had an absolute blast, and I can consider myself a fan of the franchise now, just as much as, say, Mario. I've had some pretty good realizations, and, that have also affected my, my views on gaming and my views on certain parts of life in general. It's been a, overwhelming experience. So many games I've gone through, so many, funny moments, so many frustrating moments, but I don't regret a single second of it. I know that some people have had their gripes of the franchise. There are some negative zones that I haven't really explored, but I didn't really want to talk about any of that. I just wanted to have a more positive sort of outlook on the experience and come in with the perspective of someone that is relatively new to the franchise and has gone out of his way to play as many of these games as possible. And the best part is I'm not even close to finished with this franchise, and I don't think I ever will. This is a franchise that doesn't really have a beginning or end, and the reason why is simple. It's because of the fans. It's because of the community. It's not just Sega that have been keeping the franchise alive through spin-offs or whatever racing game is coming out, but through passionate people that have grown up from different eras of Sonic, whether it be classic or adventure or boost. There is always something in the fan game spectrum that you will find and enjoy. And I've played some of them, and some of them have been absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait to play more of them. So yeah, well, that's all I've really got to say. And, I could say in the future that there will definitely be more Sonic, but rest assured, it won't just be that. There will be other things too. But I felt it was really important to sort of get all of this off my chest and just sort of really, just kind of let it out and think about what I wanted to say about the franchise, Anyway, that's all I've got to say. Thank you guys for listening to me ramble and, yap endlessly about a franchise that has existed longer than I have. Anyways, stay safe, everyone, and avoid the pitfalls. Thanks for watching.